I'm just going to start with a quote, if I may, from a lady called Mary Ann, who lives in Tower Hamlets and was one of the people that we interviewed for the poverty premium research which we at Toynbee Hall carried out in 2014. Oh yeah, I was supposed to do the thing, aren't I? And I'll do. Apparently I have a unique relationship with technology as well. And so the quote I want to give you straight away is, a few years ago, when my washing machine broke down, I did apply for a community care grant. They said it wasn't a necessity, so I ordered one from the catalogue. And that's kind of, for me, a kind of nice segue in from Peter's comments around why do people take out loans, particularly if it looks like they can't afford to pay it back. And I'm going to look just a little bit today at what do we mean by this concept of poverty premium. Now, many of you may know the term already, and if you do, brilliant, but please think of this as something that we don't really understand all of the implications. It's something we're still exploring, and there's no kind of defined, finite list of things that contribute to the poverty premium. It could be anything that essentially someone pays more for simply because they're poor. I'm going to talk that through. So what do we mean? 2007, Save the Children Fund looked at what are the additional costs of being poor. And they came up with this concept of the poverty premium. They thought about if you live, for example, in a place where there aren't many options to buy food, and therefore the food that you get to buy is priced more highly than other places where there's a lot of options to buy food, for example, an out-of-town housing estate, and there's just one corner shop, and that's the only place to buy food, and those food costs are higher. Not necessarily because someone's trying to make a quick buck out of you. It might be that that particular shop can only buy in small quantities, and so they pay more for the food. But you have no choice about where you live because you're poor, and this is the only place that you can afford to live. Then they start to look at that and say, right, so that you're paying a premium on food because you're poor, because of where you live, because of the choices available to you. If you pay for your electricity or your gas, and if you're like me and you can afford to pay direct debits, and you can afford to pay quite a lot of money, and you can commit to that on a monthly basis because you have a nice income coming in, then fantastic, you get what I get, dual fuel discounts. I could save, as I found out from a new supplier yesterday, up to £80 a year with that particular supplier. Not because I use less energy, but because I have the financial means to pay for it in a way that secures me a discount. So we're not talking about the fact that I'm poor and I use more of something, simply that per unit cost I end up paying more because I have fewer choices about where I buy it and how I pay for it. And it could be a whole range of things. So we looked at this. We're a charity based in Tower Hamlets, but we work on a national level as well. And I was really interested, what does this mean, this kind of concept of the poverty premium? And what's the extent to which Save the Children Fund's research, begun in 2007, renewed in 2010, and really kind of was a desk-based research. If you plugged some figures into a computer, what was spat out? What would we find on the streets? And I'll come back to that in a moment. We went out and we interviewed 220 people. Well, we surveyed 220 people and we interviewed just under 100 people across Tower Hamlets. And we asked them, what is your real life experience? So we're moving away from a desktop theoretical exercise to the real experience, the lived experience of people in one of the poorest boroughs in the country. I've put on here this final point, financial products. And I really have put it at the bottom because we regularly talk about the poverty premium as all about financial products. But it absolutely isn't. It can be your transport costs, it can be your housing costs, anything that where you are paying more simply because you are poor. But financial products are a means to an end. So for payments, the means to an end is simply moving money from A to B in exchange for something else, food, housing, etc. Credit is about smoothing your income. Insurance is insuring you against a risk of some kind. And then, practically, accessing your cash or cashing a cheque, in theory we think these all cost nothing until you have no bank account. And again, I'll come to those costs later. Now, I don't know how well you can see this. I apologise for lighting kind of clashes. This is an advert that I took off. Well, it's not even an advert. It's directly taken from a supplier's website yesterday. And you can see that if you go onto this particular supplier's website and you buy this particular fridge freezer, which I think most of us would agree is not a luxury item. Neither a fridge freezer in itself is particularly a luxury item, and this particular version of a fridge freezer is definitely not a luxury item. And you can see that there are some payment options. So £667.26 with 5-star service. If you pay that in this shop over 156 weeks at a weekly payment of £8.50, you will repay £1,326. Now, this is the same fridge freezer with a slightly different code on it, so you can't directly compare, but it's exactly the same product. So if you thought that you were really financially capable and you looked up fridge freezer and you took that name and that particular code and you put it into the website to try and find somewhere else in the world that you could buy the same fridge freezer as the one I've just showed you, it will not show up anywhere. But if you go through the product specification and you see exactly the same details, you can work out this is exactly the same product. And you can see here that actually you can get it for a lot less money. And here you could see how if you took it out on credit, there'd be a whole range of options. And none of them are anywhere near the cost of that first one. What's the difference? Same product, pay up in front or use credit. The difference comes down to two things. What you believe your choices are and what choices are made available to you. So I'm just going to flip back. So on this option, the key point is the £8.50 a week. For many people, when you do not have access to affordable credit, when you do not have the savings to go in and buy a product up front, 300 and something pounds in this case, or if you have no online or electronic payment methods, you just have cash, then you start to struggle with your choices. And this isn't about people being stupid and not understanding you could get that product more cheaply elsewhere. It's that you either don't have 300 plus pounds to go out and buy it up front, or when you try and find credit, the only credit made available to you comes in at these prices. And that's where Peter's point about, are you stupid? No, sometimes you are just restricted. But your fridge freezer has broken down, or your fridge has broken down, and you are really trying to feed your family, and you don't want to keep wasting food, and maybe you buy in bulk and cook ahead so that you can have something safe in the freezer. Maybe you're really good at all of that, and this actually is a really sensible investment. But the only options available to you are to pay at this rate. That's what we're talking about when we say the poverty premium. That the world out there restricts you as an individual by restricting your choices, by restricting how you pay, by restricting your access to affordable credit, to smooth income. And thus, when you purchase the same goods as anyone else, you end up paying significantly more. Such as one example. Sorry, I'm getting used to this. So really, it's all these things. Now, there's one extra bit here, which is around risk, and it really applies to the credit piece, but it also applies to insurance. All products, such as credit and insurance, have risk pricing built into them. That's my time, apparently. I'm not done. So, we'll just ignore that. So, why do we think that poor people are higher risk? Well, partly because at those rates, it's pretty impossible to repay it. Unless, of course, it's £8.50, in which case, whether you're the Provident or in this case Bright House, you can go on collecting that money. So you've priced in the risk that this person is just going to be a really slow payer, and you just make them pay forever because that's how long it's going to take you to get your money back. But what about insurance? We know statistically that people on low incomes are more likely to live in areas of higher risk of flooding, theft and fire, and therefore more likely to need the kinds of insurance that cover the contents of their home. And yet, if you try and find contents insurance at low premiums that cover small amounts of goods rather than hundreds of thousands of pounds worth of goods, it's very difficult to find those products. So it's also about, are there suitable financial products available, and how much risk is being priced in, and is that risk fair pricing? Try and take on the insurance industry and the credit industry to break down their risk models. No, sorry, that's competitive. That is commercial confidence information. They will not share that information. So it's incredibly difficult to say to the insurance industry, your risk pricing is unfair. It's very difficult to say to the credit industry, your risk pricing is unfair. Right, so how does it affect people? Two figures here. The latest figure from Save the Children in 2012, £1,280 per year. How did they get to that figure? They thought about a family. They thought of all the kind of key things they need to do in a year. They went online and came up with the best possible pricing that you can get by using different payment methods. So the most effective payment method for each thing that you buy. So online, get your fridge freezer. Online, get your insurance, etc., etc. And then they said, now, if you didn't have access to all of that, if you didn't have access to a functioning bank account, if you didn't have access to online services, if you didn't have access to a credit card, if you didn't have access to affordable credit, what would that look like? And they priced all those things up. They're normal things. They're not going out and, partying every night and extravagant holidays. No, we are talking about normal things. We're talking about buying food, paying for rent, utilities, and really things like, your washing machine breaks down or your fridge breaks down. So we went out and we interviewed those people across Tower Hamlets to see what's the real life experience in this place. And we came out with a slightly different figure, not significantly different, which I thought was really interesting. So £1,014 per year on average. Of course, the range was huge, but on average. And where were the differences? Well, in Tower Hamlets, most people were not paying high-cost credit fees. Why? Because they were borrowing, if at all, from their local community, from friends and family, and they were not paying high interest charges. However, you live in Tower Hamlets and insurance prices go through the roof. So their car insurance was extremely high. Why did they want cars? Well, many people were doing quite unsociable hours, and the only way to get to a job quite some distance away was to travel by car. So a car was essential for their income. We looked at those factors and we said, okay, what are we learning here? Well, definitely, the poverty premium and how it affects you depends on geography, where you live, the state of the place you live in, rural, urban, etc. Social norms. If it's not normal within your social setup, within your community, within your culture, to borrow from an external company, but it is normal to borrow within the community, that has a huge impact. However, if the social norm is you cannot say that you need to borrow money, and so you are pushed into borrowing from someone who comes and knocks on your door at high cost, that's really crucial. So talking about money and also having social networks that you could draw on, both for information and access to the use of financial services, was really crucial. And then finally, your individual financial capability. It mattered to a certain extent, but it was by no means the most important thing, how well you knew how to manage money. And why did it not matter so much? Because actually most of your choices were limited not by your own knowledge, but by the choices made available to you by the service providers. If they weren't going to lend you credit, didn't matter that you knew about credit. If you didn't have any choices around where to cash a cheque because you had no bank account, it didn't matter that you understood how a bank uses cheques. So financial capability can only help you if you have access to the products and services that financial capability apply to. There is a very detailed chart, and more importantly, there's a whole report, which I'd love you to read. But what have we learned? We do know that financial capability can help tackle some elements of the poverty premium, and social networks can help provide alternative options. But neither of these can compensate for that over £1,000 per household per year, where people pay more because they do not have access to mainstream products and services, not just in the financial services sector, although that is crucial, but more broadly. We saw that there's a significant mismatch between what people really need and what is being supplied, because in this country, we run everything on profit margins and believe that competition will deliver to meet needs, although every single day we can see that competition is not meeting needs. And finally, that every single sector that we look at fails to understand the true impact that sector has on the financial health of its customers, its staff, and the community in which it's based. Because it only looks at the price. It doesn't look at the impact of the way it delivers its services and products on the wider community. And in this country, we have no history or culture of understanding that an organisation is not a real thing. It is just a mechanism and a means to an end to help people live their lives. So what do we want to change? Financial services, get them to really understand people's true needs, and not just obvious demand, but real needs that lie behind that. Products must be accessible. I've got to be able to access credit. There's no point telling me I'm stupid getting a payday loan if that's the only thing available to me. They need to be transparent, but that isn't really the key point. The key point is they've got to be fairly priced. And then when the market fails, we have to step in. It is really important that we do not place all our faith in a market which is not geared up to deliver to the people on the margins. So we need to think about specialist products and services, and we need to think about targeting them. And of course, it's good and important to foster and value social networks and to support financial capability, not least through the financial capability strategy for the UK. But these things alone will not eradicate the poverty premium. And is it a myth? Absolutely not. Thank you.